All right, well, today we finish 1 John and we read all of 2 John. And yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed reading these letters. Well, actually, I think 1 John is probably more of a sermon than it is a letter, just based on the way that it sounds and it doesn't really follow the conventions of a letter. Um, and you also might have noticed that 1 John it's not linear in its argument. It's not like the letters that you read that Paul writes, where he kind of builds a case and he argues, and there's sequence and there's development in what he's saying, um, which can make the letter that John writes a bit frustrating to read for us, I think. Because it feels like as soon as you're getting some kind of rhythm up in the ideas, um, it shifts and he starts to talk about something else that he's maybe spoken about earlier. And then as soon as you get any steam up with that one, he shifts again and he starts to talk about something else. And it can feel a little bit frustrating to read through um, the, the book of 1 John. I find anyway. I don't know if you found that experience. Like if you have a look at the chapter that we read today, if you had to boil all of those verses down into a simple idea, like I'm meant to do for these videos, I think you'd probably struggle, just like I have struggled. But this, what he's doing, it's just a non-linear way of presenting ideas, and it was a really common way for many cultures and many places in history and even around the world today. I think as Westerners, we don't realize how much we've been shaped by the idea of linear sequence and development and progression, which were very much impacted and developed by deep thinkers like Plato and Socrates and even the Apostle Paul as well. They've had a profound influence on our culture. But because we're so used to that, we're not used to non-linear um, sequence of where things kind of go rambling around and around. I remember about 5 years ago, I was in Kenya for mission for about 6 weeks with Mia, and every Sunday we went to two church services in this village that we were living in Kenya. We went to the one church service in the African national church. So went along, and everyone who was there was African, and things were done the African way. And then after that, we went to a different church service at a local international school that was run by Americans, predominantly for Americans. And it was such a stark difference between the two. Firstly, the sermon at the American service was not dissimilar to what we have on a Sunday at church. Went for about 20 minutes. They exposited a passage, and it was all very linear, and there was a nice story at the start and a nice story at the end, and it kind of brought it all together nicely. In the African church, the sermon went for no less than an hour, usually upwards of an hour and 20. And it wasn't necessarily this linear kind of progressive development. It was often just the same ideas hashed over again and again over the course of an hour and a half. And maybe they would introduce a story, but then they would go back to the different idea, and then they would introduce another concept, and then they would go back to the different idea. This is a really common way of thinking around the world today and throughout history, and we actually even see it in books of the Bible, like 1 John. And if you have a think about some of the themes that have that rise to the surface in this book of the Bible, yeah, they're really poignant and helpful themes. So things like belief in Jesus as the Son of God and as the Messiah, that he came in the flesh, belief that he instructed his disciples to love each other, and that we should keep his commands, and that we should not go on sinning. Are really simple ideas that throughout the letter or the book of 1 John, they just come over and over and over, and you get it again and again and again. And I think they're really helpful things to hold on to when you just need to boil them down to their simplicity. Don't go on sinning. Keep Jesus' commands. Demonstrate love for each other. Believe in Jesus as the Son of God and as the Messiah who came in the flesh. And then the other part of the reading today was, well, a whole book of the Bible, 2 John, which is, it's not exactly huge. I think, what is it? It's 13 verses. And this letter, which is a letter, because we're told it's got the conventions of a letter, the elder, to the lady chosen by God, and then it finishes with some final greetings. It was either written to a female pastor of a house church or perhaps to the female host of a house church, but it was definitely written to a house church. And it's just a reminder that they should continue on in the old command, the command that comes from Jesus to love one another. And it's also, the purpose of this letter is to tell the lady, the one who's responsible for this house church, that they should call out false teachers. And certainly they shouldn't host these false teachers in their house, because doing such a thing endorses their message. He says in verse 11, anyone who welcomes them shares in their wicked work. So it's a bit of context. It helps you to understand that false teaching was rife in the first century of the church, and it was important that it was addressed. But I think the encouragement for us as God's followers, well, the one that I found in this letter, it comes in verse 9. And it's just a simple encouragement, just like it came up in 1 John, and it's to continue in the teaching of Christ. Verse 9 says, anyone who runs ahead and does not continue in the teaching of Christ does not have God. And I think that it's a good reminder to us that we should go deeper into the teaching of Christ. The teaching of Christ, somebody said it to me like, it's not that the teaching of Christ is the first station on the trip of being a Christian, that you start at the train station, the teaching of Christ, and then you move on to another train station after that. It's not a train station that you move on from. It's actually it's like the soil that you sink your roots deeper into as you grow as a Christian. And so I think our encouragement from this letter was to continue in the teaching of Christ, grow your roots deeper into the teaching of Christ rather than moving on from the teaching of Christ to something else. So let that be your encouragement for today.